All right, we're a little behind, so we're going to try to rapidly change the folks on the dais so we can talk about behind the dais. I think some of you in this room know this, but many things that happen in Congress are not from elected officials. They are from the staff, the wind beneath their wings. So we are delighted to have former Chief of Staff for Representative Langevin of Rhode Island give you a peek behind committee staff on OT cybersecurity.
Thanks, Josh. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming. We're very much looking forward to this conversation, which is focused on what is going on behind the scenes in the committee hearings that you may have seen on TV. The thing that I want to start off with before I introduce you to our great panelists is like what we're hoping to get out of this. And I think it's really twofold. One is just to give some insights into what it's like as a congressional staffer to be looking at cybersecurity issues in general, but then more specifically where that intersects with ends up at a strategic level being the same as, and where it really departs when you're talking about operational technology, ICS security. Just to give some framing of like, what is it like when you have a gigantic portfolio, which is what it's like working in Congress, where the executive branch outnumbers you 100 to 1, 1,000 to 1 in some cases. And then there's the whole private sector side too. So that's part of it. How do you think about things specifically to the operational technology side? And then more broadly, what's it like to be a committee staffer? Like, what is it like? What's a day in the life look like? What are the priorities that these folks have in mind? And maybe most importantly, the four-letter word of Congress, jurisdiction, right? Which is incredibly important. Like, we're going to talk about ways that you all can engage with Congress, which strongly encourage as much engagement as possible. And I know these folks love it when they hear from folks in the community about what's going on. But engaging effectively, you have to have, some empathy for what it's like to be a staffer and understand where to start from. So that's where we're going to go. But first, I'm going to have my three brilliant panelists introduce themselves. We'll start with Alan. And Alan, if you can tell folks both where you are, but also how did you find yourself on the Hill working on cybersecurity issues?
Sure. Hi, folks. Can you hear me? All right. I'm Alan McQuinn. I'm professional staff on the Democratic side of the aisle on the House Science, Space, and Technology Committee. I work for the Subcommittee on Research and Technology, and our jurisdiction is primarily not on the operational side. I say that not as operational technology, right, but like actually bringing theory into practice, right? We're the science committee, so we're focused on research, we're focused on standards and guidelines, we're focused on workforce development and helping to bring some of that wind that goes under the sails of folks actually trying to implement. And so that is primarily where we focus and where I'll be coming to this conversation. I started at a think tank called the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation almost 10 years ago, or I started there a lot longer than that. But and I came to the Hill to work on artificial intelligence policy before it was cool, back in 2019 when we did the National AI Initiative Act.
Hello, folks. My name is Mireya Jurado. I work on the House Armed Services Committee. I cover cyber, IT, and AI on the City Subcommittee, representing the majority. I have been in the committee for 1 year, came over from the Department of Defense. I actually, if I was going to pull back a little bit, I have a PhD in computer science by accident. It was a trick. They were finally paying me. Knew I always wanted to work in national security, started at the Department of Defense in an office called Cost Assessment and Program Evaluation in the DoD. It's a terrible acronym. It's called CAPE. But it's a great place because we're able to look over all of the IT, cyber, and AI across the DoD. And so that's been my portfolio when I moved over. But what I realized from working on the executive branch is needing to better understand, and also had generated an appreciation for what Congress meant for the policies and the resources of what the department was doing. And then I did a short stint at ONCD, and so I got a really good feeling for how the executive branch worked. And so when the opportunity opened up to work at on the Hill. I definitely took it. I'll say like very quickly that one of the distinctions that I've realized from moving from the executive branch to the legislative is it's absolutely diffused power and responsibility and authority. I think for the executive branch, you definitely take it for granted that there's someone at every level, an echelon that is the boss of two people and can make a final decision on something. That's not the case on the legislative side. These are all independent entities that have their own priorities and jurisdictions. And so I think that's something to keep in mind. It's been a very acute lesson that I've learned since being over there for a year.
Hi, I'm Kevin Block. I work on the House Homeland Security Committee, on our Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Protection Subcommittee on the minority side. My background is I went to law school and then didn't know what to do with my life. So ended up being a weird, old, overeducated intern in a personal office from a member from my home state of New Jersey, giving tours of the Capitol, despite my law degree. But after a couple of months of doing that, they hired me on as a policy staffer, and I worked there for about 6 years. And my boss happened to be on the Homeland Security Committee. So got to know Nick back then, and got to know the staff on the committee as well. So decided I wanted to, shift focus to focus full time on Homeland Security committee issues. Sort of ended up on cybersecurity because that was what was open at the time. So it wasn't a super specific life plan of mine, but I've spent the past 5.5 years working on issues primarily with CISA and DHS and their work on cybersecurity.
I realized I didn't introduce myself. I'm Nick Leiserson. I'm the head of policy at the Institute for Security and Technology. I did work on the Hill for 11.5 years as chief of staff to Congressman Langevin, went over to the Office of the National Cyber Director before coming to IST. And I got into this space. I have not a PhD, just a bachelor's in computer science, thought I was going to be a software engineer, discovered that no one in the computer science department talked to the public policy department, where I was also taking classes, and the public policy folks were really freaked out about all of this insecure software that was being written. And I'm like, oh, in honor of Lauren, like, it's me, I'm the problem. It's me. So wound up on the Hill and in the cyber policy space. But I think, you can hear just from the four folks up here, we've all kind of taken different paths to getting to Congress. And as Mireya pointed out, it's like, Congress is a very interesting place when you have 535 elected folks instead of 2 at the top of a giant pyramid. All right, so let's start with the most foundational question at a conference on operational technology cybersecurity. Why does your committee care about it? Alan, let's start with you.
Sure. Why do we care about operational technology? So, I'll be the first to admit that when it comes to cybersecurity, we haven't necessarily differentiated the two adequately in recent years. I think since I joined the committee, we've had maybe a dozen or so cybersecurity hearings, and the lead focus, or OT being the lead focus, was maybe prevalent in 3 of those hearings. But it's become very clear doing this work over the last few years, especially related to space policy, especially related to energy policy, and most recently we had a hearing on water policy, that we need to start thinking more critically about how our policies that we write or the legislation we draft affects IT versus OT. Sometimes that doesn't matter as much, right? When it comes to like quantum, we're the Committee of the Future, right? So we do a lot of work on emerging technologies, and I think the last 4 hearings we've had related to cybersecurity have been on quantum adjacent. And it doesn't necessarily mean that all OT providers need to be adopting post-quantum cryptography, right? In fact, that is a threat that is way on the horizon when there's a lot more salient threats that are coming at them now, right? And helping members of Congress think through those differentiations is our role, and hopefully we can continue to do that. I'll also just say that as it relates to standards and guidelines, we oversee the National Institute of Standards and Technology. They've done some great beginning work on standards for OT, and hopefully we can flesh those out and make them more usable by operators.
Oh, I forgot to mention I have to give a disclaimer. Like, I'm not representing the committee nor the chairman. These are my personal opinions. So from my perspective, the House Armed Services Committee cares about OT because military mission runs on critical infrastructure. Critical infrastructure is powered by OT. That's fundamentally why we care. You can't move fuel, you can't generate power, you can't run installations, and your military readiness degrades pretty rapidly. And then, of course, the other reason why we care is because it's obviously something that our adversaries are attacking right now. And so this is a part of the calculus of what does cyber conflict and cyber warfare look like.
Yeah, and for us, we oversee CISA, whose, mission, a central part of that is to focus on critical infrastructure security, and, OT obviously underpins that, and that's, CISA's mission to support the, federal government, state and local governments, and private sector in securing critical infrastructure. So, we have been focused on OT security for a while and trying to make sure CISA is, including that in everything that they're doing about when, looking at when something specific is needed for OT or when a more general solution is sufficient. But I think everyone, acknowledges the focus historically was on IT, but it's been, a priority for our committee to make sure we're understanding the OT side as well.
Yeah, I want to pick up on that, Kevin, and maybe we'll start with you this time for one more sort of big picture concept before we get into some of the priorities, which is how, when you're sitting there, you're looking at a letter you're going to send, planning a hearing, Alan was talking about that, looking at legislation. How do you think about right now, what's a framework you use for, should we be explicitly calling out OT here? Is this something that it's high enough up the stack that it's maybe threat oriented and we're relatively agnostic about whether the threat is going after OT, IT, something else? How do you process that? And we'll kind of come back down the line this way, but if you want to start.
Yeah, for us, I think at least asking about OT is something we do pretty consistently on most topics, to at least sort of ask the questions. For us, we recognize it's a large part of critical infrastructure and hasn't always gotten the attention that it needs. So we always, when something comes up when we're looking at a program at CISA, or, I feel like most of the hearings where, there's something in there in our memo or something about OT and the possible implications for it, whether it actually comes up in the discussion is separate. But we're always asking those questions and trying to talk to stakeholders to understand, is CISA, is this program, adequately including OT? Does something need to be tailored to that? So I think for us, it's pretty consistently part of the questions we're asking, and then talking to the actual experts to try to see if something that's tailored to OT is necessary, or whether you can just rely on the more general programs that CISA is working with.
Yeah, I think we try to be a little bit deliberate about when we reference OT. And I think thus far, my working framework really uses three buckets. Like, one, visibility. Do we need to actually highlight the aspect of OT? Is there a chance that it's going to be left out of the conversation if it's not highlighted? The second one is one of integration, interoperability, and making sure that our IT and OT technology and then our OT bureaucracies are all properly integrated together. So whenever we're trying to highlight an integration or coordination problem, then we'll try to mention OT specifically. And then the third one is really the actual, no kidding, operational nature of OT by itself. Like, is there something in the provision that we're dealing with that specifically speaks to the unique characteristics of OT? You're talking about very narrow patch timelines, long lifespans, high operational consequence. Like, is there something, no kidding, in the legislation that requires we pull out OT because it's fundamentally something different? That said, I think I don't really want to I don't want to develop a fully separate policy track for OT, because then you can kind of create a legislative and policy confusion when you need to bring attention to it, but in some cases not fully divorce it from the rest of the technological environment.
I think both of my colleagues did a great job of summarizing a lot of this, and I would foot stomp what they were saying. Where I think I could add to, because I fully agree, where I think I can add to this is the Science Committee isn't necessarily regulatory, right? We're focused on pre-regulation, on standards, on technical guidance. So in many cases, when we're developing or we're helping to facilitate the development of these guidance, like you just have to make sure OT is considered and a part. We can develop specific guidance for OT or help to facilitate the development of the guidance, and maybe that's appropriate in some circumstances, as NIST has done in the past. But where we really do focus, and I benefit a little bit because of our jurisdiction is relatively more narrow than my colleagues, but we have EPA in our jurisdiction, we have the Department of Energy in our jurisdiction, and we have NASA and commercial space in our jurisdiction. And so to the extent that we're thinking through cybersecurity policies in those three domains, we can be really thoughtful and articulate on how does this actually affect operators? Are we thinking through whether, OT and ICS are included in what we're thinking through on the broad scale? As it relates to space, for example, we are considering legislation in that space to help facilitate better coordination across all cybersecurity, both OT and IT. But so maybe it makes sense to include both and make sure they're included. Maybe it makes sense to differentiate because some of the operators themselves don't have the expertise, and we're sending things up constantly that are not secure. But we can talk about that another time.
Well, thanks, guys. And I think the thing that really stands out to me as a through line in all of those answers is approaching this with a curiosity and inquisitive mindset, right? Like you're asking questions. And I think sometimes if you spend a lot of time reading about politics, watching politics, you think people come to problems with an ideological mindset. And it's like, yes, I was elected knowing what the solution was, and I'm going to carry that forward. But I think what you're hearing is people are actually approaching these problems with a curious mindset and asking questions of folks in the community, asking questions of the departments they're overseeing about like, hey, how are you thinking about this? How should we? Let's talk through whether we want to have something that is explicit to OT. How should we be thinking about the OT landscape here? And when you're engaging with Congress, right, it's important to sort of start with that framework of like the committee staffers you are likely talking to they are looking for information. A lot of your job in Congress is to ask questions. And so coming to the table with hey, I want to help you find the solution is going to end up really helping you. And, I didn't hear anyone say like, ideologically, this is every time there is a cookie cutter solution that's going to work for every problem within our committee's jurisdiction. So just something to keep in mind. All right, now we're going to talk some about priorities. And Kevin, I think we'll start with you. Your committee, the Committee on Homeland Security, is probably most familiar to folks in this room. We had Nick Anderson here as the opening keynote. We have more folks from CISA around at the Cyber Policy Shark Tank tomorrow. I've seen the finalist submissions. They're going to be pitching things almost exclusively to the Committee on Homeland Security. So, what is top of mind for you when it comes to OT cybersecurity?
So there's a few things that I think are top of mind to us. I mean, a big part of our focus over the last year and a half has been, oversight of CISA, which has seen a lot of cuts and a lot of reduced personnel. We've focused on giving them a lot of resources in the OT space and elsewhere, and unfortunately, they've lost a lot of staff under this administration. So, a couple of things that we've done in the past was we authorized the Cybersecurity program for OT to deploy sensors voluntarily on certain critical infrastructure providers. We also authorized a program for OT cybersecurity training, recognizing that sort of workforce development, the skills in OT are different than the skills necessary in IT security. So some of our focus is continuing oversight over sort of the work that CISA has supposed to be doing, and also, concerns about proposed, additional budget cuts. On, the legislative side, partially a thing we've done in the past that I know you all were just hearing about state and local cybersecurity. A big priority for us has been the reauthorization of the state and local cybersecurity grant program, which is not specific to OT, but helps state and local governments improve their cybersecurity, and that's can include the security of publicly owned critical infrastructure and the OT that underlies that. So those are our big priority. That's a big legislative priority for our committee on a bipartisan basis, is reauthorizing that program and getting additional funding for state and local governments. And then on a topic, I think on everyone's mind with AI and Mythos and the impacts that's going to have, I think we're certainly trying to understand better what those impacts are on OT, where some of the solutions that you see on the IT side are just, we're just going to be pushing out patches and updates on everything more quickly with all these new vulnerabilities, obviously is much more challenging on the OT side of things. So not, a specific policy on that, but something we're trying to understand, how, CISA can be more useful for OT security in light of the recent AI developments.
Great, thanks for that. Mireya, you have, Alan sort of alluded to broad jurisdiction, and the DoD is the size of the rest of the federal government combined. So when you're looking across your portfolio, how do you think about, within just cybersecurity at DoD and the hundreds of thousands of people who work in it, how do you think about roles and responsibilities within the department, and also vis-a-vis the other agencies that, like CISA, that DoD has to partner with as well?
Yeah, maybe I'll start with the latter question first. So the problem for both is really one of diffuse responsibility. There's no one single department, agency, or sector that owns all of the problem. And so collaboration is really going to be key to any type of success. So I tend to think about this for the DoD in 3 concentric rings. So the first ring you have is the actual OT on a particular base that a commander and the DoD own. This is when responsibility and ability to act is the clearest. The second is the larger category of all of the critical infrastructure that is necessary for DoD mission. These 2 bubbles we would call defense critical infrastructure. And so this is the stuff that we own and that we don't own, but is still necessary for the DoD to run successfully and for us to be able to move troops and sustain them. It's in my personal opinion that I think the department can do more here than people give them credit for. There's often contractual relationships between the department and the actual critical infrastructure owners. And I think those contractual relationships could be leveraged for improved OT visibility and resilience upgrades. And this gets you out of the trap of getting into debates about which federal agency technically owns the problem, which is a great way to waste a lot of time. And then the third bubble is the larger domestic critical infrastructure, and the DoD's responsibility really here is to support the other sector risk management agencies to be able to share lessons learned, to be able to share intel, and just to be a good partner. Those types of issues, I think, are mirrored internal to the department, where, as you said, the problem is extremely fragmented. You've got installations people, mission assurance, logistics, cyber, CIO shops, and the actual commanders that own the bases, and they all have their own sets of priorities and constraints and risks that they're managing. So it's easy for things to fall through the cracks. I think the way forward here is to just have really good communication about what it means. What if OT goes down? What is going to be the impact to mission? Have those that cost benefit analysis very clearly laid out for commanders, and that way you can start to align priorities. But it's undoubtedly a very real problem.
I do not envy your portfolio, and thank you for your service. Alan, you mentioned that you all recently held a hearing on water cybersecurity that one of our co-hosts, Josh, was able to testify at. Can you talk a little bit more about what you were hoping to get out of the hearing and what you learned?
Yes, of course. And thanks, Josh, for coming out. So as Nick said, we had a water cybersecurity hearing through our environment subcommittee a couple weeks ago. And this is a topic that we just really haven't touched on the science committee my entire time in Congress, probably ever. And so we are one of those committees that is often transient. A lot of our members come for one cycle and then they move on to bigger, better committees. And they get trained up, and we're a trainer committee. So we wanted to have a hearing to inform the members about the dire state of a lot of these challenges, and to also inform us about if we were to engage, if the science committee was to draft legislation, what are our available levers to pull? Where can we properly outfit EPA to be more of a role in this space? How can we think about leveraging R&D to solve some of the more outstanding problems? And what are the workforce challenges, right? So those are the areas we focused, and we got a lot of really great recommendations from Josh and Virginia, or Ginger Wright, and other folks that are, I believe Ginger's here somewhere, from Idaho National Labs. I'll say that one of the key takeaways for us was the need to think through cyber-informed engineering. How can we foot stomp the efforts that are already going on at Idaho National Labs and from other organizations to learn about how to engineer our way out of specific types of problems related to water or energy, and take those lessons and expand them to other sectors? How can we use R&D to scale some of those solutions? And so we're actively looking at that. I don't have any news to break in that space, but hopefully we'll have more to share in the near future. But it was a great hearing, and I think a lot of our members learned about this topic for the first time, and we've heard a lot of engagement since.
Thanks. It really was. I mean, definitely one of the blessings and curses of Congress is that lots of the activities of Congress are in the public eye, and you can go on the Science Committee website right now, find the hearing. It was on May 21st, 19th. There you go. Something like that. And watch it and see, the members asking questions. There are really thoughtful questions and insights that the members are sharing, and then getting reflected back. I mean, it was a really good, solid bipartisan hearing. And again, any of the work that these guys do, you will see it. You will see the NDAA come out. You will see it debated in the next couple of weeks on the House floor. You will see markups in the Homeland Security Committee. So take advantage of the fact that we do have a very open government, and you can see what folks are thinking about and get some insights into how they're approaching these problems. So next question is sort of more on the threat side. I think we heard one of my former colleagues at the White House, John Keefe, as we were waiting for this panel to come in, talking about the 27 timeline, and the moniker Volt Typhoon as sort of a proxy for Chinese People's Liberation Army efforts to get into critical infrastructure. So Kevin, Mireya, maybe we'll start with Mireya. How's your committee? How are you approaching challenges like pre-positioning in critical infrastructure? What does that look like both within your jurisdiction, like what is, in your case, the Department of Defense doing, or CISA? And then how does it look like across jurisdictions? Because this is something that is a national level, whole of nation problem.
Yeah, I think, for better or worse, the Department of Defense has been aware of threats to domestic critical infrastructure for a while. So this isn't necessarily a new thing. And historically, Congress has kind of gone about it in two different ways. So one is hardening. I think maybe 5 years ago, we required the Department of Defense to actually do tracking of what missions are supported by which OT assets, more visibility, hardening, and all sorts of resilience efforts. So this is not something new necessarily to Volt Typhoon, but it's absolutely something we've been pushing, and it's still a gap that needs to be closed. And then on the other side, there's this question that I get, it's a fun aspect of what is fun, I don't know, of my particular jurisdiction, is the question of disincentivization, of how do you disincentivize the PLA and other nations, other adversaries from attacking these critical infrastructures in the first place. And you can think of that as either cyber on cyber, like operations, or you can think about what other levers can we pull to kind of stop this full line of attack completely. So that was a study that was tasked out last year's NDAA. So we're still looking forward to it. And then when it comes to the jurisdictional question, I think that's absolutely real. And what happens oftentimes, if it's useful at any point, there's like a very mechanical jurisdictional coordination effort that happens between congressional committees. So if something comes into the NDAA, but it wants in coordination with CISA, I shouldn't, and I would get in big trouble if I tried to just shove it forward without the approval and support of all of my colleagues in the relevant committees. And so that's, I think, just some insight into why legislation that taps multiple jurisdictions is challenging. You start dealing with an exponential coordination problem, because now instead of 2 people, you have 4, but you actually never had 2 because I forget the Senate. You had 4, and now you have 8, and so every committee that you add on, you need that many more people, and there's a lot of personalities at the Hill, to include myself, that you need everyone to sign off on. So it's just something to keep in mind.
If I could jump in really fast, I just want to say, when we did the National AI Initiative Act, it was in the NDAA process. And on our side, we had 1 committee of jurisdiction. HASC was helping facilitate. But on the Senate side, 6 or 7 committees jumped in, and they're like, we have jurisdiction here. And so we had to negotiate with literally everyone. We had the Judiciary Committee telling me that we couldn't authorize funding in a science bill. And I was like, what are we doing here?
Jurisdiction is always a challenge on Capitol Hill. I would say, a little bit on the disincentivizing part. That's a topic that's of interest to a lot of our members as well. Much less we can do about that than HASC can. But there has been certainly conversations about, how CISA and its relationships with the private sector and critical infrastructure and the information it gets can be sort of passed along to the other people throughout government to help improve our ability to defend critical infrastructure, or potentially looking at the sort of disincentive part as well. And then also, I know later today, CISA, Matt Rogers will be talking about CI Fortify, the new initiative that CISA has pushed out, which is done a lot in collaboration with DoD. So, we got briefed on that recently. I think frequently in the world we're in, there's this very much divide of like, there's the non-defense side of things and the defense side of stuff. And those are like 2 separate worlds. They're just very territorial that we have to keep them separate. But obviously, China, I don't think makes that distinction when they're looking at targets. So certainly looking at ways in which CISA can collaborate with DoD, and certainly have been interested in CISA's most recent initiatives on that.
Great. My scars were Section 9002 of the 2021 NDAA, which created in statute the sector risk management agencies. I had 11 Senate committees that I had to, both majority and minority, so 22 different people that I had to get to clear that language. That was my month of October in 2020. So absolutely, like the degree of difficulty when you see multiple agencies mentioned is way higher. And from my perspective, right, as a policymaker, I'm like, yeah, this is a challenge. Like, that is a way to ensure that the incentives are strongly on having siloed legislative solutions, because it's so much easier to get the win for your boss, to get something signed into law when it is solely within one committee's jurisdiction. And, we owe all of the folks up here a huge debt of thanks for doing the work to coordinate, because that is what the nation needs, but it is like just putting more work on their plates, and is, I don't think, often appreciated by folks on the outside who are like, well, it's one government. It's like, yeah, but it's not one committee. Alan, one other thing that you've mentioned a couple of times is workforce. And I would be curious, how you look at workforce challenges in the OT space in general, then maybe the OT cybersecurity space, and then, you know, just to throw on the table how that might change, or how you're thinking about how that might change in age of more advanced artificial intelligence.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and it's something that we explored a little bit in the recent water cybersecurity hearing. So our committee has a lot of STEM ed programs. We have the National Science Foundation within our jurisdiction, and NIST, and collectively they account for a lot of training programs. Not all of them. There's a lot of stuff at DHS. There's a lot of stuff at NSA and DoD, but we have the Cybersecurity Scholarship for Service program that is kind of critical to getting a lot of talent into the federal space, and the National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education run through NIST, which helps like coordinate a lot of this work. And we authorized and re-updated that law actually in the same bill. Nick was referencing earlier the NDAA of 2021, fiscal year 21, in something called the HACT Act. Now, those programs just do not align with the needs of OT operators and providers. They're not set up to do that. And it's something that to date, the Congress just hasn't updated to fix. And so as we look at possibly reauthorizing those programs, bolstering them we would look to try and solve some of that work. Another core recommendation that came out of the hearing related to water cybersecurity came from Josh, and it was related to like helping facilitate more cyber clinics. How can you get more technical assistance to help train some of these people in cyber poor industries and sectors? And I think we'll be taking a look at that as well. So I don't have like a hard solution, but I think there's an acknowledgement on both sides of my committee to explore this and make sure that we're not leaving OT folks out when we're thinking about workforce legislation.
Great. And, you know, just to foot stomp an earlier point, but because it keeps coming back, right? Like, I think it's the second time you said, hey, here's something that we heard about in a hearing that is turning into, we're exploring as new ways for legislation, for additional follow-on. And I think it can be hard when you're looking from the outside and you're like, I'm a voice of 330 million of my fellow Americans. Like, how do you turn this gigantic ship of state that is the United States government? But like, it really matters, right? Like having these conversations with folks, the input does help change the way people approach problems. And, you know, for this community in particular, which has very high leverage insofar as it's like, it's not that big, it's critically important to our national security, that input is incredibly vital to our success as a nation. So please keep it coming. We have 2 questions for the panel on priorities, and then we'll get into some of the engagement from Congress. And then we'll have about 10 minutes at the end for questions from you all. So now is around the time you should start thinking. But first, it's NDAA season. We've got 6 months left in this Congress. What's one thing that you would suggest folks in this community might want to watch for the rest of this Congress? Alan, we'll start with you.
So Science Committee has been working arm in arm with our committee, the Committee on Homeland Security colleagues, to authorize the CVE program and modernize it. It's Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures Program run through CISA that helps folks patch their bugs on the IT side, but also on the OT side. And so we're hopeful to get it into NDAA, and I would just flag that movement. Hopefully we're successful. It is a steep uphill climb to get anything that is not directly defense related into this package. At least it has been over the last several years. But we remain hopeful, and I think we can make the case that this is very important for our national security.
Hear, hear.
I don't control anything that goes into the NDA at this point, so I'm supportive of their efforts. I think one OT thing that is currently in the House version of the bill, so I know that this is a very niche piece of knowledge, and sometimes people don't fully understand that the House builds its own full bill for the NDA, and the Senate builds a different own full bill for the NDAA, and then in the months of October and November, we fight each other in 4-hour teams conference meetings and actually decide what lands in the no kidding bill. So that's just some context. In the House one right now, there is one requiring combatant commanders to consider OT when it comes to planning and exercises. So that sounds a little maybe boring if you're thinking about military exercises, but what it reflects is an important change of perspective of OT cybersecurity and critical infrastructure matter for military mission and military success. And so that's something that's currently in there and we're supportive of.
And I will mention another provision in NDAA reauthorization of CISA 2015 that has been getting a long-term reauthorization. It's been a big priority for our committee. It's proven challenging despite widespread support in Congress for doing so. Those information sharing protections, underlie everything that CISA does, whether it's OT, IT, or otherwise in cybersecurity. So I know it is, gotten into NDAA at the markup recently. So that will be a big focus in the coming months.
All excellent provisions. One point just to Mireya is about fighting each other in conference. The old adage on the Hill is the other party is the opposition, the other chamber is the enemy. So, just to give a sense, we are all house folk here. So, I got to be real careful about what I say. One thing that I always enjoyed when I was a staffer, and Alan Alan's here. So a great example of this is highlighting programs that work well, right? Because a lot of the time in Congress, what people focus on is this is broken, this is the gotcha questions, this is whatever. And that's important, right? Oversight should be helping to ferret out places where the executive branch is trying to sweep things under the rug. But part of the fun is also being able to say, here's where it's working really well, right? These are processes that are working well. These are programs that you should be, as an American citizen, proud that your government is working on. So wondering, maybe Kevin, we'll start with you just down the line, something that you're this is actually working and people should be happy that their government is functioning correctly on this issue.
Well, I don't want to, get too enthusiastic. So I want to caveat everything that there's been some good progress. I'm Congress, we complain about things is what we do. When the executive branch, everything, nothing's good enough for us. But, one program, I think CISA obviously has a huge role with the private sector, but they also do a lot of work securing federal networks. And we've invested a lot of money in the CDM program to try to, help improve the security of federal agencies. And I think we've seen some good progress on that recently. Specific to the OT space, it's always been an area of interest of how the program can be, better expanded to cover OT assets the federal government owns. But that's, a program that we've invested a lot of money in and maybe doesn't get as much attention as some other things. And where some of that money, I think, is bringing some tangible results after some earlier hiccups. So that would be one.
I think recently the Army Principal Cyber Advisor had a DCI summit at Fort Bragg earlier this year, where they kind of addressed that coordination problem that I was referencing earlier by bringing in folks from industry, from state and local governments, from the interagency, from the private sector to deal with the critical infrastructure on the base and in the surrounding areas. And I think it wasn't just a war game, it's also leading into the development of a DCI playbook that they're going to proliferate across the Army. That's going to have lessons learned, it's going to have resiliency objectives. And then I think they're using all of this to better inform some actual mitigation of critical vulnerability pilots. So that's something that I'm really happy that they succeeded with.
The old adage is always the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And so, the vast majority of even the programs I've mentioned today, there's been a fire at, and so they rise to the level of, oh my gosh, how do we fix this? Everything's on fire, right? But one program at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, the NCCOE, is great. everyone always comes to us and is like, this is the greatest thing. We should give more resources to it because they're able to facilitate conversations between sectors on how to develop guidance or standards for a particular use case, whether it's like helping facilitate better cybersecurity for medical devices or helping to ease the transition to post-quantum cryptography for various sectors. Like they're doing really good stuff over there, and it's mostly private sector driven. So I've heard a lot of folks talk about how great it is.
Yeah, it's some of the reference architectures that come out of NCCOE, like I hear people reference just, in general conversation, and I don't necessarily think that they quite realize exactly like, hey, this is an intentional program set up by NIST to ensure that you can, in a vendor neutral way, help people solve real problems in cybersecurity, including on the OT side. So great programs all around. I think Brandon Pugh, the principal cyber advisor in the Army, is a critical effects speaker veteran, but I will have to check on that. We've got about 8 minutes before we go to Q&A, but I have 3 quick questions for the panelists on engaging with Congress. So we'll ask that you keep the answer shortish, although you've done a very good job so far, so that we have time for questions from the audience. The first is, what, from your standpoint, is the biggest misperception that folks have about working with Congress or about Congress in general? Alan, let's start with you.
That we're all super partisan. I mean, you have on this committee or on this panel some bastions of bipartisanship. Everything that goes into the NDAA for the most part is bipartisan. My science committee, we haven't passed a partisan bill, and I can't remember how long. We do everything in a bipartisan manner. And so a lot of this is still collaborative and trying to find ways to work together on issues like science that people agree to.
I think one misconception that sometimes folks come in with is that staffers don't understand the technical background behind what's going on. I think you have to hit at the right level. So this is not to go extremely deep immediately. It's, provide the high level, like headline, lay of the land, and then work down into, like, don't be afraid to go down into the details. We spend a lot of our time thinking about these things. And sometimes if you stay at too high of a level, it becomes difficult for us to actually understand what the true problem is and try to think about what the solutions are.
Yeah, and I just say that there's a lot that Congress does that is invisible to the public. I know when I started, people, asked me how many staff were in my office when I was in a personal office, and I was like, oh, we have like 8 people in DC, and they're like, that many? Because I think from their perspective, they're like, I don't know, you guys just like tweet, and like, how many people does that take? Like, what are you need all these people for? Because I think there's just like a public side, and even if it is, just because there isn't a hearing on a topic doesn't mean there's not committee staff and personal offices working on it just because it's not, on the floor. So I think that's the part. There's just like a lot of things a lot of people are doing that the public can't see unless you're, if you engage with Congress and come meet with people. I think you'll see a lot more of what that work entails.
It's perfect segue. So the second kind of rapid fire is, from your perspective, from your committee, what's the best way to engage on cybersecurity issues and OT specifically? Maybe Kevin, we'll start with you and work our way back.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're, generally pretty happy to meet with people. If people have ideas, if people have concerns, it's always helpful to get that perspective from a broad range of people. So we're always, happy to have those meetings. I think for people who are interested, it's really trying to identify, who the right people are on Capitol Hill to talk to. As we mentioned, about jurisdictions, about, expertise. We as committee staff are going to know a lot more than, personal office staff, but sometimes those are still good people to talk to. So just, identifying, what the issue is that you need to talk about, and then working to identify who the best people are and tailoring it to those people.
Yeah, I would work off that. So it's coming in with a clear understanding of what the problem is, and then it's not getting too stuck on whatever you think the right legislative solution is. I think there are sometimes, budgetary, jurisdictional, or political reasons why a particular solution may not be the best one. But if we have a shared understanding of what the problem is, we can work with you and brainstorm about what the space of possible solutions could be.
I would just say that Congress is a lot more accessible than you think. Like, if I don't know who covers an issue in an office, I will literally call the main line of that office and say, hey, who's the legislative assistant that covers cybersecurity policy? And they'll give you the name. Our emails are standardized. My name's Alan McQuinn. My email is alan.mcquinn@mail.house.gov. And that's the same for most folks. You could probably ask the office to verify that it's a standard House email. And the Senate is similar. It's first name _ last name at senator.senate.gov. Like, whatever the name of the senator is, .senate.gov.
So the final rapid fire question, and then we are going to questions from the audience, is, and Mireya, maybe we'll start with you this time because you already sort of touched on some of it. What's the single piece of advice you would give to folks in terms of making the engagements effective? Like, if you are going to talk to a congressional staffer, this is the thing, this is your shining light, this is the thing you need to keep in mind to make sure that you have an effective engagement.
I think there's probably a lot of aspects to that question, but part of it really goes back to having a clear problem statement. But in relationship, you need a concrete example of what you're talking about, like a real life vignette makes the problem real, makes it something we can start to rotate as a group and flip around. It's something I can take and give to my leadership and they will understand what it means immediately. And so coming in with like a strong example is really helpful to kick off discussions.
Alan?
Yeah, I would just foot stomp what Mireya said. Like, come in with a purpose. Like, and that purpose could be to educate us on an issue. It could be a specific policy outcome. But if you come and just like ask us, hey, what's going on the committee? Like, the meeting won't go as planned and you won't make an impression. Keep in mind that we as congressional staff, whether on committee or off committee, have a lot of meetings a day. And so you have to cut through, the challenge is often to cut through what like someone else's fire is.
I don't have much to add. I was basically going to say the same. It's always good to have an ask or a clear point that people are trying to make when they come in.
Great. We've got about 8 minutes for questions. And all I'll ask is identify yourself. Keep it short, under 20 seconds, please. And please end with a question mark. Jonathan.
Thank you all. I'm Jonathan Cedarbaum. I'm a professor of practice at George Washington University Law School. My question is there any chance that Congress might push back on the administration? Private, or is that the kind of issue where bipartisanship breaks down?
I'll just repeat this real quickly for folks in the recording. The question is are the cuts to CISA something that Congress can push back on, or is that where bipartisanship breaks down? And I think Kevin.
Yeah, well, I'll say, certainly Democrats, we've been trying to push back as much as we can. I think when you look at things like what's come out through the appropriations process, some of the cuts have, clearly been rejected from what was funded, for FY26. And I think, some of those cuts were also rejected in the House bill that's been released for FY27. So, I don't want to speak on behalf of Republicans, but, I think that, shows there's certainly a lot of bipartisan concern, I think, about what has happened to CISA. Obviously, it's challenging because they've lost a lot of people. So no matter what we do, it's going to take time. And obviously, they are hiring again at CISA now. But, it will take time to staff up. But, I think just looking at, again, some of what's gone on through the appropriations process, which is bipartisan, reflects that, Congress, is pretty supportive of continued funding and staffing at CISA.
Duncan?
Duncan Sparrow, old retired guy. So follow on the next question on sort of what I typically ask, what have we done well as our side of the community in either hack the Capitol or hack or something? done well in the past and we should keep doing.
I mean, I love the Hackers on the Hill program. I met with the folks yesterday who came all the way over to the House from the Senate to chat with us, and it was a very productive conversation. I'll say that program is incredibly successful, and I look forward to those meetings every year.
Yeah, I think really quickly, as Alan was saying earlier, we have a lot of meetings all the time, and the vast majority of these are with companies that have very specific goals in mind. And so any opportunity that we're able to talk with like larger cohorts of people who are interested and truly care about this issue, or the Hackers on the Hill program, where these are people that don't necessarily have agendas, they just truly have a technical perspective and want to do good, is a refreshing experience and appreciated.
Paul.
One of the big changes, safety review board, not destroyed or dismantled, well, it was dismantled. Any sense on whether that might be some work in what they do?
So I forgot to repeat Duncan's question. So for the record, he had asked, what are some ways that this community has engaged effectively? Paul's question is about the CSRB, the Cyber Safety Review Board, and Kevin, I'll kick it over to you.
Yeah, I don't have much of an update on that. We were, big supporters of the Cyber Safety Review Board in the last administration and some of the work that they did. But don't really have much of an update on where things stand, with the administration currently, or if anything may change on that. We certainly talk to people about it, but not anything concrete.
Donald?
Thanks, Nick. Congress often acts after a visible failure. What will it take to create the public awareness and political support to address systemic OT risks before a major disruption? And to what extent do the members actually accept that and act on that awareness as being part of their responsibility?
So the question is how Congress likes to act following a catastrophe of some sort. How do you create the environment so that they can act beforehand? Open it up to anyone who wants to jump on that.
I mean, I don't think you're wrong. Congress does have a habit of acting after something's become a crisis. I think, Kevin mentioned earlier the advent of super advanced LLMs and what they're going to mean to both IT and OT. And we're seeing some of the acknowledgement come out of that from the administration side already. We know we've all seen references to the clearinghouse in the AIEO, and the intent there is to centralize a lot of, as I understand it, I'm not one of them, is to centralize a lot of the effort around what kind of let's triage vulnerabilities, verify that they exist, prioritize remediation in a centralized way. So you don't have all of your individual sectors doing this multiple times, oftentimes for the same set of open source software that maybe somebody else had already discovered. And so I think there is and this action that you see from the executive branch, there is a matched awareness and growing tension and fear on the congressional side of what is it going to mean when you can start taking down these systems much faster. And so in some ways, we have reached a crisis that is bringing more attention. What this looks like in our ability to act and legislate in a timely way, in a way that doesn't codify legislation that's overly restrictive. I don't know the answer there.
Just to jump on that, this didn't necessarily catch everyone off guard, right? We started working on AI legislation in 2019 that allowed the development of the NIST AI risk management framework. In the CHIPS and Science Act, we authorized NIST to do an AI-enabled automated defense test bed that was never implemented because it was never funded, right? Congress has done some things over time that would look at solving pieces of this problem. And last Congress, we took up for cybersecurity related, AI pieces, like including authorizing what is now known as the Center for AI Standards and Innovation. Before was the AI Safety Institute, authorizing cybersecurity programs around what does it look like for coordinated flaw disclosure of AI systems that fall outside of the realm of like the CVE and the NVD programs and the CWE program and the existing cybersecurity vulnerability sharing mechanisms for AI. The problem is Congress isn't a monolith. And so while there was bipartisan efforts, we didn't pass any of those into law besides the CHIPS and Science one. And even when we did do some of those, like we never found funding for it. So yes, a lot of the underpinning of this is members of Congress have focused on a long time on both the Senate and the House, but will it come to like actual this moment that Mireya talked about where we're over-regulating? Maybe, because we just haven't done enough to address the problem.
On that very cheerful note, thanks, Alan. Please join me in thanking these folks. It's NDAA week. They got to go back and work from amendments, but for coming to join us, and go enjoy lunch.